All right, folks, greeting. Welcome to another super very special episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, or City of Demons, depending upon what you want to call it. And, like I said, this is a super powerhouse show. First of all, let me introduce my guest co-host of the day, the world's largest UFO YouTube channel, Third Phase of Moon, who I am fortunate to know. Blake and Brent Cousins, spent some time with them in Hawaii recently, and more importantly, worked with them for the last 7 years. So, with that being said, Blake, are you on the line?
Yes, sir. Good to be here with you, Dr. J.
All right, excellent. Now let's introduce our two guests. This first one is a returning guest. He is someone who also speaks Greek, and you may have heard us speak Greek on air. And you all know him, so I really don't need to give that much background information. So with that being said, Giorgios, welcome back.
Wonderful to have you to be back, and good to hear your voice again.
It's always a pleasure, Giorgio. Always a pleasure. Okay, and we have the creator of Ancient Aliens, Mr. Kevin Burns, live with us. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you.
Pleasure is all ours. Now, I'm going to start with you, Kevin. What was the basis to start this show? Because you are the creator.
It really came out of an Indiana Jones documentary that my company was hired to do by Lucasfilm when the Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out. And we did a 2-hour documentary special for the History Channel, and they wouldn't tell me anything about the movie, but when I saw the trailer and I saw the poster, I figured correctly, as it turned out, that they were going to, it was really the crystal skull and the elongated head, but it was about aliens. And so, without knowing much about the movie, I decided to approach the documentary in the style of a documentary I had seen when I was in high school, and it was called Chariots of the Gods, based on the Erich Von Daniken book. And the movie, the documentary, like the book, was a series of rhetorical questions. So that's how I approached this Indiana Jones documentary and did it in what I recalled as the style of this documentary. And in doing that, I asked my producer, I said, find me the American equivalent of Erich Von Daniken, because I wasn't even sure at the time that Erich was still living. And my producer, Nikki Boella, tracked down Giorgio, and Giorgio appeared in that documentary for Lucasfilm. And then after it aired, and it was very successful, I asked to meet with Giorgio, and he came up from San Diego to Hollywood to meet in our offices, and we hit it off, and I decided then and there I wanted to do some kind of a show with him. And then when I mentioned this to the people at the History Channel, who had aired the Indiana Jones documentary, they were very keen on the idea of doing a 2-hour special on Chariots of the Gods. And, of course, through Giorgio, I did meet over the phone with Erich Von Daniken. We had his blessing to pursue it. And we did a 2-hour show. We called it Ancient Aliens. But it was basically my version of an update of Chariots of the Gods. And it did hugely well, so well that they kept coming back to me going, can you do 5 more 2-hour shows? And I said, sure. And then they came back and said, can you do 10 more 1-hour shows? And I said, well, I'm out of pyramids and Nazca lines, but I'll see what I can do. And that has led to a series that's been on the air for 11 years and 12 seasons and nearly 200 episodes.
Wow. Clearly, this is something that's not going away anytime soon. And I'm glad, because there's so many changes. Blake, what do you got to say?
Well, I've been enjoying the show for this past decade, no doubt about it. Ancient Aliens is the landmark for people to come watch on TV in regards to the ancient technology that's been out there. I want to ask both of you guys, Kevin and Giorgio, about this Oumuamua. Being that we're here in Hawaii, there's a recent event that happened in our solar system of a terrestrial of a visitor known as the Oumuamua, and apparently we've been trying to speak with Canada-France Observatory to get more information on it, and they've been kind of silent. They're really not going public on exactly what the Oumuamua was, and we've heard from an astronomer there, and we can't really name names, and they're being again silent about it. They're saying that the Oumuamua or something like it is on its way back.
The guy's name is Avi Loeb. There's no conspiracy there. The guy's name is Avi Loeb. He's very public. He works at Harvard, and he has proposed that it is an extraterrestrial probe. So there are some people who say it could be an asteroid, and it is without question the first extrasolar object that has visited the Earth. That's what we know of, or the solar system. But to say that nobody's talking about it, that is an incorrect statement. Everybody is talking about it, and first and foremost is Avi Loeb of Harvard University, and he is at the forefront of suggesting that thing is a probe. So, and some people subscribe to that idea, and then the other side says, no, it's not true.
Well, Georgia, what I'm saying is that the Canada-France Observatory and the people over there, we wanted to ask them about what their thoughts about the Harvard study, and they kind of refused to go public on Third Phase Moon and tell us exactly their thoughts in rebut to the Harvard study.
Well, that's their choice. If they don't agree with it.
Now, let me ask you, Giorgio, since you have been returning, because we know there is so much history, as we've talked about several times over the last 7 years, that has ultimately led us to pretty much prove that some sort of living being that had technology that we do not have has been able to create stuff that we cannot even create in modern times. What do you think is the biggest case of evidence for the skeptics, the Michael Shermers of the world, the Robert Schaeffers, and so on and so forth?
Well, unfortunately, not a single example, because I have spoken to those people, and you could take them to another planet, and they would still say that it's a conspiracy and it's fake. So, I always go to Pumapunku in South America, which is about 500 yards away from Tiwanaku. We're at an altitude of almost 13,000 feet.
Wow.
And there you have these amazing pieces of stone, blocks of stone that have been cut with such precision that we today could only replicate it with high technology such as water-powered jets, and we would cut it with high-powered jets. And, we're talking about andesite blocks and also red sandstone. With the red sandstone, that is a soft stone. Yes, you can cut it with your fingernail, not a problem. But the problem with the red sandstone blocks is that they are incredibly, incredibly heavy. And at an altitude of 13,000 feet, there never were any wooden logs that the archaeologists suggest were used in order to, move these things around on wooden rollers. And the question of cutting these rocks, they are made of, and the other half of the rocks are made of andesite, gray andesite, and only copper and iron tools have been found there, and you cannot cut andesite with copper. So your guess is as good as mine how it was done, but it certainly was not with iron tools. And also, by the way, it was also not done with lasers, because we actually tried to cut a piece of Pumapunku rock with laser, and the surface that the laser left behind was this globulized black surface, completely hardened and very, very rough, the complete opposite of smooth. And anyone who's ever been to Pumapunku can attest that when you touch the gray blocks there, they're as smooth as the surface of a bathroom mirror.
Blake, what do you have to say?
Well, I want to ask about the Pumapunku. It looks like there was some kind of catastrophe, an explosion. Some of these H blocks are just torn apart. Do you have any speculation of what could have caused these megastructures to be torn apart the way they are?
Yeah, well, this is actually a topic that we've explored on the show on many different occasions, where we have asked ourselves the question, could these stories of ancient cataclysms be correct? And Puma Punku is a primary candidate with which we could illustrate such a potential idea, and that is that some scientists, and again, this is not my opinion, these are things that scientists, geologists have proposed this, where Puma Punku is at an altitude, like I just said, of 13,000 feet. Now, in the surrounding area, you have fossilized remnants of ocean animals, ocean life. So how did that ever get up there? So the idea is that at some point there was this massive cataclysm, which basically lifted the earth, and things that were higher back in the day were lower, and vice versa. And this was illustrated too with the idea that many of the stones or blocks at Puma Punku are in fact currently found underground in the earth. And so the idea is that at some point, some type of a cataclysm, maybe some type of a flood, some water came into the area and ripped the stuff apart. And this implies, if this were true, that would imply an extreme antiquity of at least 10,000, if not more, years old.
Blake, you have a final comment before you go?
Yeah, I want to say, what about a possible solar blast? Some people are speculating 10 to 12,000 years ago, there was a solar blast that hit planet Earth and tore everything apart.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, all of these ideas and propositions are possible. And all I have to say is that, if that stuff happened 10, 20,000 years ago, we're due for the next one.
Well said. Now, let me take this back. As you both of you mentioned, Erich Von Daniken, such a great guy. Over the last 7 years, I've had dozens of interviews with him. He appears at least every 3 months. I think I probably do more interviews with him within Coast to Coast at this point. He was a huge factor in my life because I didn't even know about the history until I read Chariots of the Gods. But like many people involved in this, it usually takes somebody to experience a sighting or something before they really start to go down the rabbit hole. So I'm going to turn this to you first, Kevin. Did you first ever experience any anomaly that you could say was a UFO, clearly unidentified, whether alien or not, but something that you could say did not look like it was from this world that really got you down this path?
No, it wasn't any kind of a sighting or experience of that nature. I think what it was I was raised Catholic, and and when you get into Catholicism, it's interesting. A lot of ancient astronaut theorists, are former Catholics or raised Catholics or current Catholics, because Catholicism is one of the religions that is very metaphysical in terms of its belief system. In other words, it believes in, as Christianity and a lot of ancient religions, Judaism, Hinduism, believes in metaphysical things of a metaphysical nature. But when you are a 5, 6, 7-year-old kid going to school and you're taught about transubstantiation and all sorts of miracles, then you kind of grow up in a world that you're accepting of a lot of things that would otherwise seem bizarre. And but when my father died about 30 years ago, that was a big thing for me. I mean, that was the event for me where I wanted to know, was any of this true? What was the teachings of my childhood, were they true? And what I found was, between watching the Joseph Campbell interviews that Bill Maher conducted on PBS, but also Erich Von Daniken and certain other things, because I'm a big film geek and science fiction and horror, and I found that in cinema and also in nature, in art, in science, in physics, that the nature of the universe is one that's based on order and unity and balance, as opposed to what I would call modern day secular science, that kind of preaches a kind of a gospel of randomness and chaos. And I feel that that the universe suggests more of a balance than science would have us believe. I mean, science would have us believe that mankind and our sentience is really nothing but a fluke of nature, a random event, an accident. Basically, we're monkeys that got lucky, and we created language and art and music and literature. And I think that that's not necessarily true. And I think that there is a missing component in mankind's DNA that doesn't match up to the other animals and primate life on this planet. And so as I got more and more aware of ancient astronaut theory and became reacquainted with what was in Erich Von Daniken's books, I don't profess to be an ancient astronaut theorist so much as I'm a curious-minded person who is open to ancient astronaut theory. And so I'm very happy that we've created a television program, certainly one as successful as Ancient Aliens, that allows this discussion to take place. I mean, Giorgio is far more confident and certain of things than I pretend to be, but I am curious. In other words, I'm the audience for the show more than anything else. I like playing that part of the audience that really wants to know the answers to these questions, and that. So the event, triggered by my dad's death, I would say that was the event that triggered my journey, as it were, into what has become Ancient Aliens.
And it's been a fantastic journey at that. Now, with what you said with regards to the primates, you're absolutely right. It looks like something came and jump-started our civilization. But there's something that I just recently found out, and it blew me away. Did you know that primates have now entered the Stone Age? They're literally spearfishing and using rocks as tools. What do you have to say?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
What about you, Giorgio?
No, I have not heard of any primates spearfishing. I mean,
If you just search it, there's an orangutan, and the thing is, it's more likely that they're definitely in the wild. There are lots of videos and photographs that show them spearfishing and using rocks as tools, etc. But the idea is that they probably mimicked what we do. And it's not that as if they just decided by themselves, but clearly for the last 4,300 years. And this is not some sort of fringe science. When I first heard this, I actually, went down the rabbit hole and saw a lot of videos and, that featured a lot of primatologists. I was just blown away. But it almost looks like that if we...
Yeah, but I have to interject. I agree with Giorgio. I think that you can't disassociate the fact that a lot of them are copying human behavior.
Yes.
And there's an awful lot of anthropomorphism that goes on, where we want to ascribe to animals human traits, like language and sentience and things like that. Whereas, no, I think that survival instinct is such that they will, obviously they can climb trees to get a banana, or they can, they can fish, or hunt to survive. And a lot of those things are instinctual, but it's a far cry from being able to kind of innovate or invent something, even as simple as a tool. With which to get something. I mean, they might be able to copy our behavior, but I don't know that their brains are functioning on the same level.
You're absolutely right. That was my biggest question. The question that I started to face was, had we not been here, would they have figured this on their own? And I've come to the conclusion that that is no way. No way could that happen. These primates swinging on trees in the jungle, in the wild, would not have tried to do what they're doing now if it wasn't for what we've been doing for thousands of years. Now, let me
Yeah, I mean, again, evolution does play a part. I mean, I don't think that ancient astronaut theory, if I can speak on behalf of ancient astronaut theory, but I don't think ancient astronaut theory disregards evolution. I don't think ancient astronaut theory disregards science, and I don't think it disregards religion. I think what it does, in a weird way, in a profound way, is embrace and allow truth in all of these various disciplines. In other words, somehow science has gotten into this mindset of disassociating itself from religion or faith or the metaphysical. And whereas I think ancient astronaut theory reconciles these things by suggesting that, yes, of course, evolution does play a role, but there's something else that plays a role. Now, whether that's intelligent design, whether that's the innovations of quote-unquote God, or whether that is an extraterrestrial intervention, that's what the show, kind of causes you to investigate and reflect on. In other words, that's where we want people to go in terms of thinking and coming up with their own opinions as to what could very well have happened, but to introduce the fact that it's much more complex than we've been taught.
Oh, absolutely. And I think right now the fact that one of the reasons why it's so successful are because of the times. I don't think this would have worked, say, 30, 40 years ago. Unsolved Mysteries was a great success, but, when it featured content like this, that was maybe 10% of the show at most. Now, not only do we have Ancient Aliens, we have every major cable network. We have National Geographic, Discovery, Travel Channel, Destination America, things like that are definitely pouring lots of money into shows like these. And what I've noticed too is that...
Well, actually, what they're doing is pouring money into shows trying to copy Ancient Aliens. That's what, because, and I don't say that disparagingly, but either they're trying to react to or kind of refute, or they're trying to copy. But the success of Ancient Aliens, trust me, I cannot, I don't think it's overstating it to suggest that I've been approached by so many different networks, each wanting their own version of Ancient Aliens. And I'm, proud of the fact that, Giorgio and the contributors that we have, David Childress and Nick Pope and a lot of the other people, I think they would acknowledge, and you can ask Giorgio, that we're much more open and much more, in other words, certain networks have certain obligations. Like, for example, I was talking to a colleague at the Science Channel, Discovery Science, and he said, well, we did a show on alien mummies and it didn't do a rating, and we don't know why. And I said, well, did you put skeptics in the show? And he said, well, of course, we're the Discovery Channel. We have to put skeptics. I said, if you were doing the birth of Jesus, would you put skeptics in the show? And he looked at me, and
silence, right?
I said, well, there's your answer. I said, if you want people to indulge in a theory or a thought, why deliberately undercut the theorist or the audience by suggesting that everything you're telling them isn't true? I said, what you want to do, without being irresponsible, is to present it, make sure you present it as theory, but let them come to their own conclusion. You don't need somebody to come in 12 seconds later to say, well, there's no proof. Well, most theories have no proof. The Big Bang does not have proof.
That's right.
It's a theory. Theories have evidence. Theories have evidence. They don't have proof.
Theories have to be tested through multiple different times and reaching the same result before they leave being a theory to actually being a scientific fact.
Right. And so ancient astronaut theory is a theory based on very compelling and difficult to refute evidence. And it's the evidence of things like, you asked about what would you show a skeptic. I'm different than Giorgio. He goes to Pumapunku. I go to the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid to me makes absolutely no sense as a structure. It certainly doesn't make any sense as a tomb or a temple. It does make more sense as a very old, possibly 10,000-year-old or older structure that may very well have been, at least the evidence that we've presented has compelled me to believe that it could very well be a power plant. And once you embrace that notion that it could be a power plant, then all bets are off in terms of what the capabilities of ancient humanity may have been capable of, in a prehistorical setting. Now, was that extraterrestrial in nature or influence? That I don't presume to answer, other than we live in a very wondrous world, and a lot of things that have been presented to us as fact, I would suggest we go back and start putting question marks at the end of them.
Oh, absolutely. Like, for instance, saying that the Egyptians were the civilization that was before others. Well, you just recently was on the news that Greece, they found more, and Giorgio, you might know this, 2600 BC, what looks to be marble pyramids on an island in the Aegean Sea.
I have not heard of marble pyramids, but I've heard of the skeletons that were found on Crete, and that suggests once again, another skeleton, another humanoid ancestor was found that is much, much older than the previous ancestor that we found. So we have all these pieces of evidence of previous, humanoid ancestors, all of which, at some point existed for 50,000 years or 100,000 years. Some existed 300,000 years. You have to ask yourself the question: what were they able to accomplish in 300,000 years? There's really no record left. And then sometimes we find these so-called parts, these things that have been found at very deep levels of soil, and you have to wonder, how did it get down there? And so people like Graham Hancock, for example, are proposing that this planet has had multiple super civilizations like ours before our chronology began. So, and ancient India has spoken about this in their ancient Vedic texts, that this planet, the life on our planet goes back hundreds and hundreds of thousands, and some texts even say millions of years. And, sometimes you have to look at these things and wonder, what did they all mean? Were all of our ancestors really out to lunch? Or did they actually write down stuff that they actually witnessed and experienced because it was so crazy that they had to write it down and put it in stone and on paper and everywhere else, because otherwise they knew that their future generations would no longer believe what they experienced. And this is why we're in this gigantic mess that we're in today.
Here is a question in the chat that I think is a good question to ask to both of you, so whoever wants to take it. Have ancient aliens ever researched under the sea or looked for sunken structures or artifacts?
Yes.
Frequently.
We've done multiple episodes about that, in fact.
We've done episodes about Atlantis. We've done episodes about underwater caves, about possible underwater alien, origins. In fact, we did one recently. I think it was called "It Came from the Sea."
Yes,
it came from the sea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, there we talked about the amphibious beings in that particular episode that are reported worldwide in ancient mythologies and things like that. So yeah, the below the sea topic has definitely been broached by us on multiple episodes.
There's that Greek, what they call a computer, and the name is blanking out. Is it Antikythera?
The Antikythera. What is it?
Yes, thank you.
Antikythera mechanism.
Can you both explain what you think that possibly is?
Well, that is an artifact that was found by Greek sponge divers in 1906 off an island in the Mediterranean in Greece, off the island of Antikythera. And it was found with other artifacts, treasure chests and things like that. And one of the artifacts that were found completely fell out of the chronology of what was capable at the time, because you have this small box that has small little cogwheels, and it's basically a prehistoric computer with which to predict the orbits of our planets in our solar system, and with which to predict the constellations. So it is incredibly sophisticated, and there was or is no evolution in technology for that particular mechanism. So, the question is, how was this, not necessarily how it was built, but who gave the knowledge for something to be built like this? Because it is an incredibly sophisticated machine, and even Greek archaeologists themselves have a hard time ascribing to who actually built this thing. And so this is right up the alley of ancient astronauts.
It really
I'm
is.
not saying
that one object really has
extraterrestrial.
blown me away, because it definitely seems so far ahead of its time.
Right, but I just would like to put on the record that the Antikythera mechanism is not an extraterrestrial artifact. It's definitely something that was built here on Earth, but as the ancient astronaut theory suggests, how did they gain this knowledge? Because for that to have happened, there had to have been an evolution in technology. And we all have to agree that at the time when archaeologists are saying that this was allegedly found, the evolution of technology was not as sophisticated that would have been required to build something like that.
Well, one thing I wanted to jump in on this, because Giorgio said, we don't consider it an extraterrestrial device. One of the big issues that we have, and one of the big pet peeves of mine, are people who charge the show or ancient astronaut theory in general with being, quote, racist. Of course, everything today is called racist. And the argument being that we deny the authorship of extraordinary architecture or extraordinary technology to people who, of course, today we would call them people who live in, quote unquote, the third world or third world countries. Although at the time these things existed or were built, what the hell was the third world? I mean, it's ridiculous to start ascribing, what these countries may be today versus what they may have been, or who those people may have been 5,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago. But it couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, what we do say, and what I say as somebody who produces the show, is when you look at every ancient civilization, whether it's Egyptian or Mayan or Aztec, or you look at Judeo-Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu, all of them have origin stories. Even Native American cultures have origin stories that credit people from the sky, people from star systems like the Pleiades or Orion, with coming to the earth, usually winged creatures or angels, coming to the earth, imparting wisdom and technology, giving humanity life or sentience if it did not exist, and then departing. Well, that's ubiquitous in ancient culture. All our show attempts to do, and we've said it in the prologue for most of the last 11 years, is what if it were true? When we say at the beginning of the show, billions of people around the world believe we have been visited in the past by extraterrestrial beings, what we're doing is acknowledging religion and saying, because all religions are based on the concept of extraterrestrial beings, not necessarily big-headed, almond-eyed green aliens, but creatures from other worlds coming here. And all we're doing is saying, what if this is true? And if you accept that, if you look at religious texts as having some degree of actual history to them, well then, this is what Erich Von Daniken was inspired by. All of a sudden, a lot of these anomalous structures and carvings make more sense. And so the presumption of ancient aliens is, what if it were true? And that really is the basis of the show. It isn't to deny authorship of the pyramids from the people who lived in that region at the time. We could call them Egyptians. I don't know that they called themselves Egyptians. But we're not denying the spectacular technologies to mankind. What we're saying is there may have been something in addition to mankind at work. Does that make sense, Giorgio? Is that fair?
Well, yes, absolutely. And the idea is can be summed up very simply by saying that, if human ingenuity really were everything, and this is what we're accused of, that we are denying human ingenuity, well, then you know what? We need to abolish any and all teaching position around the world. We should abolish all schools. We should abolish all universities. We should abolish all teachers, because, if human ingenuity were such an ingenious thing, well, then, we can learn anything by just staying in a room, and it'll come to us through osmosis.
Yes.
And the truth of the matter is that is not the case. We are all the product of one thing: education, teachers. Your parents were your first teachers. Then you went to kindergarten, then to elementary school, and then on to middle school, high school, and maybe to university or whatever. But even if you didn't go to university, you go then get your first job. At every step of the way, somebody has to teach you something. So the idea that everything on earth started out of a vacuum, that is the struggle for me, because that is not even possible today, because we all need instruction. We need to be taught, reinforced learning. So all we are saying is that these extraterrestrials were our teachers. That is it. And the last time, I cannot remember that I was upset at a teacher, because I've only had good ones. That's all I have.
I could definitely agree with you there, Giorgio. Same thing with me. The teachers are who essentially molded me in my mind into what I am today. I do have a problem with linear thought as far as teaching people everything, as opposed to finding each child what they're good at and focusing on the good to become the best, and not trying to push things that are not so good for them. Like, for instance, if they're not so good in one subject, they don't have to be.
Saying, of course.
No, let me ask you about...
Every child should be fostered.
Yes, amen. Amen to that. Now, I know we are already over time, so I'll try to make this quick. Let me ask you both about angels. I've always had the perception that the people who were drawing angels 1,000, 2,000 years ago, etc., with wings, may not necessarily be telling us that these beings had wings, but were trying to represent the fact that they had the ability to fly, possibly even in a craft. What do you guys say about that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we've explored that concept on the show on multiple occasions, where it is a fact that, for example, in the Bible or in the Christianity, the first renditions of angels with wings only came about 350 A.D. Before that, there were no wings or winged beings in Christianity. The only other winged beings that you can find was outside of Christianity. For example, with the Sumerians, with the Anunnaki, and with those winged statues and carvings that you can find. And I completely agree with you, Dr. J, that was a way of our ancestors to brilliantly illustrate that these beings had the capability of flight. Whether or not these beings actually sprouted wings from their back, I don't really care about this. What I care about is that they try to tell us something that's so blew their mind. They had to put it in stone in order for us to, or for future generations to see this. Otherwise, and I've mentioned this before, they said to themselves, nobody will ever believe us, because they themselves knew that what they experienced was out of the ordinary, because they were a people of nature back then, much, much, much closer to nature than we are today. Do you really think that they were not able to differentiate between the disk of the sun descending from the sky or an actual shining disk that they said looked like the sun and never said it was the sun or it is the sun? So our ancestors were very specific in telling us exactly what was going on, but in what we decided to just look the other way and say, come on, those guys, they were just smoking dope and drinking too much of their first produced beer, and so they came up with fantasy stories. Well, any reputable psychiatrist and psychologist will tell you that not a single idea is born out of a vacuum. You can't start from zero and then all of a sudden create something magnificent. There had to have been a spark of inspiration. And according to the ancient astronaut theory, that spark, the initial tools, were given to us. And by tools, I'm not referring to physical stuff. I'm referring to,
wisdom,
just ideas about life. That was given to us by blood extraterrestrials.
There's something that Erich Von Daniken tells me that always resonates with me, that I always like to put out there. Especially for those who still believe that what was written, like for Greeks, right, that they wrote mythology. And I was always tell people to read it literally. Don't think it's just someone making up their story. And what Erich Von Daniken said, at that time, the people who could read or write were usually the aristocrats of society, people very close to the king or emperor. If they were not writing what was actually happening, and the very first words that they were ever to write was a story, a novel, a fantasy, they would be beheaded. And I think that is so very true. They were writing down what they were seeing. What do you guys say about that?
No, absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned Greece again, because Kevin mentioned how we're always attacked in all of these things. The ancient astronaut theory suggests that any and all ancient cultures were visited, including the ancient Greeks and the ancient Scandinavians, and that is slap dab in the middle of Europe. So also Europe was visited by extraterrestrials. All those stories you hear in the mountains of Austria and Switzerland about those magical trolls and the fairy folk and all this, in the ancient astronaut opinion, though, that is all related to extraterrestrial visitation. And so this idea that only people in South and Central America and Africa had help from EPs is complete nonsense, because any and all ancient cultures, as Kevin was mentioning earlier, have the exact same origin story. Someone or something descended from the sky, a so-called cosmic egg. It cracked open, a bright light shone, and then humanity walked out of it. I mean, what more beautiful way can you describe something that you've never seen before that's technological than with words like that? We have a different vocabulary today. Back then, our ancestors didn't have the vocabulary that we have today. So, of course, they would talk about flying snakes. Of course, they would talk about, golden eggs descending from the sky, or giant flying turtles. But as I was saying earlier,
not to interrupt, but that is the way it's been translated. It's not even necessarily what they meant to depict. It's the way it's been translated.
Now you've opened Pandora's box. Translation, that's not even... Man, that right there could be an entire episode, because we know for a fact that translation errors have been done 1,000 times in thousands of texts. So you're absolutely correct, Kevin. Of course, it's also a matter of translation.
I definitely think doing a show with linguists, multiple linguists, to see if there are any problems with the translations. But we do know there are dead languages. There are not people that are right now are walking amongst us that may speak the identical language of, say, Sumeria or ancient Greek. Sure, some Greek residents still are taught it, but that's not something that you're going to randomly hear on the streets of Greece or in the round throughout the world. Now, this next question, I'm going to start with Kevin because I'm going to try to get this wrapped up. This is going to be a little difficult because this is kind of like asking to pick your favorite children. Every time I'm on a show as a guest and people say, well, what was your favorite interview or who's your favorite guest? And it's just impossible. So if you can't give your favorite, maybe a couple favorite, and if you can't give it all and just say they're all your favorite, then I absolutely can take that answer. But Kevin, if you were to pick what you think is the most informative episode that made the most impact with the viewers, what would it be?
Honestly, I'd have to go back to the first 5 that we did.
Those were fantastic.
The first 5, or there was the 2-hour special, but I'd say what we call season 1, which were the 5 2-hour shows. The way we came up with those is the network had come to me after the first 2-hour show, and they said, can you do 5 2-hour shows? And I said, well, how are you going to air them? And they said, well, once a week. And I said, do you hate me? And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, no one's going to watch a 2-hour show every week. And, of course, I was totally wrong, and they did. But in trying to approach how am I going to do a 2-hour series that airs 5 times, I came up with the idea of the 5 rhetorical questions that we used to show at the beginning of every episode, which was, who were they? Where did they come from? What did they leave behind? Where did they go? And will they return? And so we used that for the foundation of each of the 2 hours. And I think that even though each episode was fairly general, meaning it was more of a survey of what we've now gone back over the years and done what I'd call deeper dives into, deeper and deeper into each topic. But those first 5 2-hour specials that were the basis of season 1, I think really set us on a tremendous course and set a standard that we still go back and revisit. I mean, those shows are still airing on the network. I have my producers, and especially new producers, come back and watch them because it's they were very groundbreaking, but I think they really set the bar very high, and it's a level we try to maintain every week.
Well said, because Kevin, those are my favorite. Those, after the first 2-hour special, when you had those 10 hours, the 5 episodes, those 5 episodes were my absolute favorite. I still watch every episode to this day. I am absolutely caught up, and I love all of them. There's not a single one that I say, oh, this is boring, let's change the channel or drop it or stop recording, nothing like that. They're all amazing. But for me, it was that first season. What about you, Giorgios?
I would have to agree with Kevin, and obviously Kevin more than I, we watch the shows as they are produced and as they go through different cuts. And so personally, I really have to say what you said at the beginning, that they're all like my little children, Mm-hmm. So each episode, in my opinion, has an important, at least 1 or 2 important pieces of information in there that have not yet been explored on other shows. So, this is also, I'd love to, thank not only the audience, but also, the team behind Prometheus, the producers and the writers that we have. They're tremendous researchers, and, we can all be very, very happy and lucky to be working with Kevin and Prometheus.
Well said, and, really congratulations to both of you for such amazing success. This is what I believe the biggest thing ever to happen in History Channel, and 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when they look back, this will be going down, what I believe, as the biggest show on History Channel, if not on cable ever. Now, since we are out of time, let me ask from both of you, and just please hang by off air for a quick moment. If you have a final message to everybody, what would it be? Let me start with Giorgio, and then I'll go to Kevin.
a final message, keep your eyes peeled to the sky, always.
That's what I say. Okay, Kevin, what would you say to everybody?
I would say keep your mind open. I think we live in a wondrous world. I don't think we've answered all the questions we're here to keep asking. And I think that the purpose of life is to keep learning and keep challenging. And when somebody tells you they have it all figured out, I would say then go back and check the math, because they probably don't.
Well said. And I always say this at the end to everybody: keep your eyes in the sky, but most importantly, that everybody don't be passive. Be an active researcher. If you're watching Ancient Aliens and if you know somebody who may not know about these topics but has an open mind, introduce them to that. Disclosure, folks, is in your hands. With that being said, be sure to keep watching Ancient Aliens. And of course, if you want to know anything about this show, Dr. J Radio Live, the only thing you have to remember is the name of it, folks. Every single social media account is the same, at DRJ Radio Live. With that being said, this is Dr. J along with Kevin Burns and the one and only Giorgios Tsoukalos, and we are going off air. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hi, this is Kevin Burns, creator and executive producer of Ancient Aliens, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.